Good afternoon, everyone. Wabashek, Anu Dagish, and Disnakas, Boku Brakovich, and I have a special guest with us today, and a very important discussion. It's about the Pope visiting Turtle Island, our territory, and to talk about a few things, of course. And I'm going to let our guest, Saul Sanderson, talk about that. We're very busy with our government. We have a lot of things that we're doing with our government right now in our territory and our nation, and we're going to continue those relations. And of course, we're broadcasting today in our regional office here at the Gambler Anishinaabe in Brandon, Treaty 2 territory, also the territory of the Dakota and the Nakota people. We share this territory with them, and we're very proud to be sharing this territory with them through the Iron Horse Treaty. So with that, I'd like to welcome our guest, Saul Sanderson. He was on earlier about governance and did a wonderful job explaining all the areas that we have to work on, and what he's been talking about the last 40 to 60 years we're doing. And he's congratulated us both online and, of course, in presentation form of all that work we're doing. And he's done a great job explaining how we're moving forward with a lot of the relations that we're working on, but a lot of the structure and the foundation and the executive processes. So with that, Saul, the Pope came to the western part of the Turtle Island, and tell us a bit about the Pope's visit.
Yes, it was important that the Pope come to our territory, and it's still identified as Canada's territory, and it's our territory. And many of our people that survived and experienced the residential school trauma wanted him to be here to apologize. And he's done that. And it's okay for his apology, like I told the Archbishop of Canterbury for the Anglican Church. You know, your apology is okay, but you haven't got any deliverables. But this trip by the Pope provided us many opportunities that are being missed. Why? Because there's a lack of understanding of the bigger picture here and the perspective of how things came about to this date. And that's not understood. So if we want solutions, we need to know what those historical issues are. And we need to know what our historical issues are respecting what we have to do. You're doing that now in Treaty 2. Everything was denied 500 years ago by the Pope in 1493. You know, you're doing it there in Treaty 2. They denied our sovereignty and stuff like that, and I'll come into that. But the doctrine of discovery, there's many interpretations of what the doctrine of discovery, but it's very simple and straightforward. The empires of England, Spain, France, and Portugal divided up the world. England had the jurisdiction for North America, Australia, New Zealand, and parts of India. Portugal and France had jurisdiction for Africa. Spain had South Central America. And what they did, of course, we know that they explored the world to take illegal possession of the indigenous Indian nations' lands and resources and waters. And they realized that an outstanding issue that they had to address formally. But a code of silence, I talk about the code of silence that's out there that nobody knows much about. For example, those explorers slaughtered many of our people worldwide in the millions. How and why? Well, the code of silence is not many people know anything about the law of dominance. And that law of dominance is what? What is it all about? Makes it legal to kill indigenous peoples. That's why those explorers slaughtered our people like they did. And I don't have to go into much detail about that, but it was our people being slaughtered worldwide. Now, when the empires and their governments wanted to move forward with the lands and territories that they stole from us, they needed to validate that theft somehow. So what did they do? They went to the Pope of the Catholic Church, who issued a papal bull instruction in 1493 that says what? Indigenous peoples are not human nor Christian. Because they're not human, they don't have sovereignty and government. Because they're not human, they don't have title to lands and resources and waters. Because they're not human, they don't have rights. And they proceeded to issue and construct laws on how to implement that papal bull. And the governments of the empires proceeded to implement those laws and policies through their own jurisdiction and their own government. So the Pope talked about the governments being responsible for creating and implementing assimilation. Well, it's not just the governments, it's the churches too that done it. So when we move forward and look at those issues that I call the Code of Silence, what did they do after the Papal Bull of 1493? Well, the empires got together in the 18th century, and they developed what they call the 1830 detribalization policies. Again, a code of silence that people don't know about. You'll recognize the objectives in 2022. The objectives were Christianization, to make Indians like them. Christian civilization, Christianization, assimilation, integration, and liquidation. Those are the 5 objectives of the 1830 detribalization policy, based on the objectives of the 1493 Papal Bull and the Doctrine of Discovery objectives. Now, when we look at that process, then how did they do it? Implement that process? They made laws outlawing, first of all, our sovereignty and our government and our jurisdiction and laws of our nations. And they made laws and policies targeting the individuals, the families, the extended families, the communities, and the societies of our nations by outlawing our lodges, our traditions, our customs, our practices, our beliefs, our values, our language, our culture. All that was outlawed by formal colonial laws and policies. Excuse me. But when we look at that process and you see, how did they implement it? Besides creating all those laws and policies, the residential school method was only one method of many that they used to terminate us and to apply those colonial policies. So there's not only one government that done it, not only one church that done it. They all done it. And the party policy.
Wow, Saul, that's a lot of information and a lot of hurtful knowledge as well that you just talked about. And Miigwech and Anaskumin for sharing that. Continue on. Tell us a bit about again, the Code of Silence and colonial process and policy Canada has been doing.
Before we go there, I'll talk about the impact of those colonial policies of the Doctrine of Discovery, the Papal Bull of 1493 and the 1830 detribalization policies. Those are fundamental documents that existed and they're carried on today. And they've created over 500 years of systemic racism. People keep asking, where did this racism come from? Well, it's there. It's right in there. And now you know the objectives, you know the purpose of those policies, but it does something else. because of the laws they made outlawing our governing systems and our way of life and our language and our culture and all that, we lost total control of our economy, of our political development, our government, and our social safety net, and looking at our citizenship, membership, all those issues like land and resources. You can identify them all, and we lost total control. So what happens to a society that loses that degree of control? Well, you're looking at it today. You see all those symptoms that are a result of us losing total control. And it's not easy to fix what the Pope is talking about and what our people are talking about in terms of the impact of residential schools on individuals and families. When that law outlawed their total way of life, affecting them not just in residential schools, but right in our homes and our communities. Now, when you look at that impact, the third world conditions that we're experiencing today comes from that process. So Canada then developed what they call a Code of Silence again, the 1947 to 1947 plan to liquidate Canada's Indian province within 25 years, on how to terminate the special rights and status of Indians, how to terminate the treaties they made with us, how to go ahead with transferring responsibility for Indians from the feds to the provinces. And that's being done today under provincial law and jurisdiction. By whom? By us, you see. Now, when we look at that whole process of the 47 plan, I could go on with what it contained, but that gives you an example of what impact it has. So, and you go to the 69 White Paper policy, and that's a Liberal Trudeau policy, and it says how to terminate the special rights and status of Indians. How? By amending existing laws and constructing new laws. So they've even terminated now the sovereignty remaining intact in our title to lands and resources and waters. How? By implementing an amendment to the Indian Act for fee simple land status, with the feds having jurisdiction over our land, resources, and waters.
So how can Canada do that? Like, how can they falsify their jurisdiction in our territory, and why can't we do something about it? Up until now, of course, FNT2T is doing something about it, but how come some of the other nations aren't jumping on and doing that? What are your thoughts on that, Saul?
Well, first of all, they have the fear of doing it. And secondly, is the how. How do we do it? Asserting our own government jurisdiction in the parent legal system. And it's tied to believing that our jurisdiction ends at the edge of the reserve. Well, our jurisdiction is portable. Our sovereignty is portable by community, regional, national, international. So the laws and policies that you have made here in Treaty 2, they'll be enforced in that way, not just by community, but collectively. In Treaty 2, you'll enforce them regionally, nationally, internationally. But that's not being done. Now, if we don't occupy the field formally with our own laws and jurisdiction, who's going to believe you? We have to take formal steps to let them know that we're occupying the field with our government jurisdiction and laws. So when you look at this 69 White Paper, first generation devolution policies, that's what's being implemented today. Then came the 74, 76 Native policy to set up federal municipalities on reserves by incorporating everything. Today you see everything incorporated under provincial or federal jurisdiction and laws. And along with that, then it was hiring Indian, Métis, and Inuit people in the front lines of government to promote and implement these policies I'm talking about. Now, even in 1974, 76 Native policy, a total code of silence. Now, 1980 Buffalo Jump, a Mulroney conservative policy. It's total genocide. You know what a Buffalo Jump is? Well, now they've clarified by stepping up the process through a second generation devolution plan and strategy on how we terminate ourselves and how we terminate our rights and our status. So that's what's being done through provincial law and jurisdiction. Now, the provinces have no jurisdiction at all to legislate respecting Indians and Indian lands on or off reserve. But now you're occupying the field for your citizenship and membership that'll apply regionally, nationally, internationally. And that portability under Section 35 is there. It's recognized under Section 35, not just the treaties anymore. So when you move forward then with how we need to move, what the strategy is, for example, on the Pope committing to reconciliation. Well, we need to nail down a reconciliation implementation agreement that includes the recognition of everything that they denied in 1493. We can do nothing less. And along with that, we build in how we address the needs for the individuals who were affected by that residential school system.
So you talk about reconciliation, and we call it reconciliation. Just taking one step further is actually doing the action. And one of our letters, of course, to Canada has been, Trudeau, JT, you have 90 days to pay these invoices, and if you don't, we'll do our measures in our treasury and accountability and our transparency and administration laws. But we've been very nice up until now, and we want to continue to be nice. Of course, we haven't said it aggressively. We've said it really nicely that you owe us $27.5 billion for the land taken up for 22-23, of course 21-22 as well, and then the $21.5 billion with a B. This is right. For the resources stolen, and of course our $6.2 billion infrastructure program services. What impact has the Pope's apology, and tell us a bit about the apology, but what impact has that made in us moving forward as the Anishinaabe and Innu nation in this territory? How do we now move forward on the doctorate discovery, not recognizing it, and the Papal Bull not recognizing it, and not recognizing the Indian Act and the NRT and all these acts that have destroyed? But does Canada get it yet? Does Canada understand that they're continuing on the genocide and the abuse to us by dividing and conquering, for one? But does Canada understand the apology that was just made by the Pope?
No.
No way.
I don't think his own church does.
Oh.
Not just Canada. And that's where things come into play, like implementing your sovereignty that he's suggesting exists and has existed. And the process that's available now for the comprehensive legal political relations between the Crown and Indian nations provides for everything you're doing in Treaty 2. And it provides for the recognition of our sovereignty. Like, you can't have nation-to-nation relations without having sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
So what form does that sovereignty take? It's our inherent sovereignty. Where does it come from? Our inherent rights, our inherent title to lands and resources, granted to us by the Creator, to our nations and peoples. It comes from nowhere else. So it's up to us to move forward on how we move in implementing our own government jurisdiction, applying those issues that clearly lay out how to do it. And that's what's missing. Now, you're doing it, you see. So that executive management I talked about, that's one of the main functions of the executive management is political accountability on how you implement your sovereignty, your jurisdiction, and your laws. And then individually and collectively. And then comes program accountability. There has to be laws governing program standards that provide for acceptable standards of living.
Absolutely.
The feds have none, and we have none. So everybody's using through devolution provincial laws and jurisdiction that don't recognize any of our inherent rights or treaties and treaty rights. Now that's devolution under 69 White Paper and 1980 Buffalo Jump and a 1947 liquidation plan. For the 1947 plan to liquidate Canada's Indian province in 25 years. You see, our challenge is one of how we move forward to do all that collectively.
All righty, just to wrap up, I'd like to first off thank you for speaking about the visit as well as what we have to do next with our relations with Canada and the international nations and community. So with that, what?
I'd just like to conclude by identifying what the Pope committed to.
Oh, yes, yeah, let us know.
First of all, the
sure.
Pope committed to doing a formal investigation into his church.
Okay,
Those are his words.
yeah,
Now, that's pretty major. And the code of silence that I talked about can form a major part of that investigation and show the people how it impacted on them individually and collectively and in our communities and our societies of our nations. Now, we have that opportunity to examine and identify how that investigation is going to be put together. And it has to include investigative research, not just academic research. Academic research doesn't really deliver much, but investigative research will uncover whatever has to be identified for resolving these issues. And then he had also committed to reconciliation. Now, I've talked about the need to have a reconciliation implementation agreement between the churches and the Indian nations, the nations, the indigenous nations, and that has to be done. And how we frame that implementation agreement is having to deal with the individual issues that they keep talking about having to be addressed. But we move beyond that and look at what the plans and strategies are for implementing our alternatives. And built into that has to be how we move forward our way in everything that we do under our government jurisdiction and laws and implementing our inherent rights treaties and treaty rights. Like I said, inherent sovereignty, inherent rights, treaties, and treaty rights are portable by community, regionally, nationally, internationally. So that's some of the stuff that he committed to, but he's also committed to dealing with the issue of how the government has implemented assimilation. Now, with the perspective and the background I just gave you, much more than governments is implementing assimilation. Everybody.
absolutely, yeah,
See?
yeah. And did Canada sanction the churches, or the church sanction Canada? How did that work?
Papal bull.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. It goes back to that document.
Papal bull is very powerful. They certified universities from the 1400s
Oh, yeah,
worldwide.
yeah.
That's a lot of power.
That's right, and lifelong learning. That's interesting. Last, of course, is what do we need to do? Next steps. We're sincere people, Anishinaabe and Indian people of the territory. How do we move forward, solve in this situation and this time of 2022?
Well, that's where you need to move forward collectively on what you're doing right now in Treaty 2. And enforce it under your sovereignty, your government jurisdiction and laws at every level. But there's nothing stopping you from negotiating a formal agreement with the churches that implements reconciliation, implementation plans and strategies, with them recognizing your sovereignty, your government, your rights, your status, and your territory. You can build in all those conditions into what they have to recognize now, because things have changed after 500 years.
Yeah.
And if you're going to change the conditions that we're experiencing in terms of third world conditions, we have to take full control, and with the proper resources, proper financing, like you're moving on. And the taxpayers, they don't realize that there's a burden for taxpayers' costs in government. They can't even afford their own political systems, municipal, provincial, territorial, none of it, and federal government. legal, political costs.
Wow.
Their taxpayer dollar doesn't come close to covering those costs.
Yeah.
And again, they don't even know what those costs are. But the type of financing you're after is what they've been benefiting from.
Absolutely.
Nobody's examined the total amount of money that is out there, and more important, the sources of all those revenues. That has to be done. And that's for the bigger picture again, to fix the relationships I was talking about earlier.
Yeah. Absolutely. So there you have it, Saul, Miigwech, Nanaskamen, for giving us your perspective on the Pope's apology and visit. We have the 23rd, 24th of August coming up, the Grand Council, and of course, Treaty 1 to 11 in September. That's going to be exciting times. I know meeting the alliance with Treaty 8, they have a great leader, Grand Chief, and they have really good keepers that are really working hard in Treaty 8 right now. So do some of the other treaties. Of course, Treaty 5 has really taken a good step forward, and they're moving forward. Treaty 1 as well, and we're meeting with Treaty 4 to see what they're up to, and all the treaties in the Western Territory. But more stepping for us, of course, is the Grand Council in August in Ebb and Flow, Anishinaabe. That's very important for us. So with that, thank you very much.
Just on that point you're making, I mentioned that meeting for 2 or 3 days is not sufficient.
Absolutely.
You need a minimum of 3 weeks.
Yeah.
About 3 or 4 times a year to get the nation's business done properly. And we tie up our leaders in administrative agendas, not the political agenda, but you need to have that time. They need to have that time to properly debate and discuss and understand what they're going to do collectively, especially on the political agenda.
Absolutely.
It's the type of thing I keep talking about. You want solutions, you need political access. And that's it.
Absolutely, and that's a great solution. So we're going to be taking it to our governing council to endorse the invoices that we've sent to one of the governments hurting us today. But moving forward, I know they've worked hard. Canada is definitely working hard to redo what has happened. But they got to be sincere. They got to pay the bills. They got to move forward. This divide and conquer just has to stop. And you talked about that. And let's just get going on things. So with that, this is our show for the afternoon with Saul Sanderson. Of course, Senator Sanderson, he's done a lot of work in this area. And we really appreciate his knowledge and understanding of a lot of the situations that are happening in our nation. And he said it, after his book that he asked me to work with him on publishing it 25 years ago. Now we're doing the hows, and that's what we're doing in the FNT2T government and the territory. With that, Wabashek, Canoe, Doggish, and Disnakas, Boka Brakovich, signing off, MTN Live. Thank you very much. Nanaskamen, Miigwech, Egosani. Thank you.